Order in the court. The judge's booming voice cracked through the air, but it wasn't authority in his tone, it was ridiculous. The words hung there, dripping with venom, each exaggerated syllable a cruel echo of Marcus's own voice. A ripple went through the room, gasps, muted chuckles. Even the court stenographer's hands slowed on the keys. Marcus felt his chest seize. That sound, his stutter, twisted into a joke rang, louder than the gavel ever could. He had heard mockery before, but never from the very person sworn to uphold justice. The prosecutor's lips curled, barely disguising his satisfaction. From the back row, a cough tried to disguise a laugh, and somewhere deep inside Marcus, the fragile thread holding his composure began to fray. His attorney shifted in his seat. "Your Honor, proceed," the judge cut him off, still wearing that smirk. Marcus swallowed hard. Words pressed against his throat, desperate to escape but choked by shame. The courtroom wasn't just a room anymore, it was an arena. And he was the entertainment. The silence that followed wasn't empty, it was suffocating. Every head had turned toward Marcus, their stares heavy, unblinking. He could feel them dissecting him, his trembling hands. The shallow rise and fall of his chest, the way his lips parted but no sound came. The prosecutor leaned back, his eyes sharp and gleaming like a predator waiting for the final stumble. "Take your time," he said, dripping sarcasm. Marcus's heart pounded so hard it seemed to shake the table in front of him. Each breath felt stolen, as though the room itself wanted to choke him out. From the gallery, a whisper carried then another, until it was a chorus he couldn't decipher, only feel. Shame crawled up his neck, hot and relentless. He wished the floorboards would split open and swallow him whole. The judge leaned forward, lips twitching with something between impatience and mockery. Marcus's pulse quickened. He wasn't sure if he could survive another word. In the front row, his mother sat rigid, her hands knotted into fists on her lap. Her knuckles were bone-white, nails biting into her palms. She didn't blink. Her gaze was locked on the judge, her eyes carrying the weight of every injustice she'd ever witnessed, every insult she'd ever endured. Her lips pressed into a thin, quivering line. She could shout she wanted to, but she knew the cost. One wrong move and they'd twist her anger into a weapon against her son, so she stayed still. Every muscle taut, fury trapped beneath the skin. "Baby, just breathe," she whispered. Almost soundless, but Marcus heard it. It was the only voice in the room that didn't cut. IW wasn't Marcus's voice, cracked like glass under pressure. The judge raised an eyebrow. Wasn't what? The question was a dagger disguised as curiosity. IW wasn't there. The last word disintegrated on his tongue, each syllable falling apart like it had nowhere to land. A muffled laugh burst from somewhere in the gallery. His knees shook beneath the table. He wanted to run, to vanish, to become invisible. The judge's mocking voice replayed in his head, louder now, drowning out reason. The harder he tried to speak, the more his tongue betrayed him. Twisting around sounds that once felt safe, his attorney placed a hand on his shoulder, a silent plea for him to keep going. But Marcus's confidence had already cracked wide open. The words he needed most stayed locked inside, imprisoned by the echo of their cruelty. A sharp click broke the tension. Someone had started recording. Then another. Phones were raised, their black screens reflecting Marcus's humiliation like cold mirrors. On the far side, an older woman lowered her gaze, ashamed to watch. A young man in the back shook his head in disgust, while another leaned toward his friend, whispering something with a smirk. The air grew heavy. It wasn't just about the case anymore, it was about the spectacle. Marcus could feel the weight of history pressing down on him, the kind that never made it into textbooks, but lived in whispered stories of how justice really worked. Marcus dropped, his gaze staring at the scratched wood of the desk. The voices blurred, the judge's gavel a distant echo. He retreated into himself, somewhere quieter, somewhere the laughter couldn't reach, but the truth was already tightening around him, preparing to drag him further into the fight he never asked for. Your Honor, my voice cracked in the present, but in my mind I was 8 years old again, standing tall in front of my class. One day I'm gonna be a lawyer, I'd said, chest puffed out like I could take on the whole world. Back then, words came easy, like air. No stumbles, no shame, just confidence. I didn't know yet that the same system I dreamed of serving would try to break me before I ever had a chance to step inside it. The courtroom wasn't always my nightmare. Once, it was the stage for my dreams. I grew up where broken streetlights. Stayed that way for months, where sirens sang us to sleep, and where you learned quickly who had your back. Marcus, always remember you're worth more than what they say. Miss Janine from next door used to tell me while handing out plates of fried chicken to half the block. We didn't have much, but we had each other. The corner store owner let kids run tabs their parents couldn't pay for weeks. On Saturdays, the old heads gathered by the barber shop, talking about justice like it was a distant cousin who never came to visit. That's where I first learned our community was both our shield and our reminder of the battles we still had to fight. It was 5th grade when everything shifted. Mr. Dorsey, the gym teacher, thought it was funny to call me out in front of the class. Marcus, why do you talk so slow? You sound like a scratched-up record. The laughter hit harder than any dodgeball. I remember freezing words stuck somewhere between my brain and my mouth. My chest tightened, my palms sweat. From that day on, my voice felt like an enemy waiting to betray me. No one knew that at that moment, something inside cracked. The stutter wasn't just about speech, was about trust. Trust that when I spoke, I wouldn't be turned into someone's punchline. That trust never fully came back. Not even years. Later, in middle school, teachers pulled me aside like they were breaking bad news. Marcus, maybe focus on trade work, one suggested, like my future was already carved out in cheap stone. Coaches benched me for lack of confidence, not speed. Even cops eyed me like trouble waiting to happen. They didn't see the boy who stayed up late studying under a flickering bulb. They saw a statistic. People like you don't make it far, one officer once muttered. I carried those words like bricks in my backpack, each one daring me to drop my head and accept what they thought I was. Every insult, every doubt, they became gasoline. I replayed them on nights I couldn't sleep, using them as fuel to push harder, aim higher. Watch me, I'd whisper to myself, over and over. They could underestimate me all they wanted, but I refused to hand them the satisfaction of being right. My voice might shake, but my will never would. Hey you, stop right there. The voice shot through the air like a whip. I froze, backpack strap sliding off my shoulder. Mr. Reynolds, the corner store owner, was pointing straight at me, his face twisted with urgency. 2 officers turned. At once, eyes locking on me as if the verdict was already in. That's him. Matches the description exactly, Reynolds barked. What description? I managed, but my voice barely carried. Don't play dumb, one officer said, closing the distance. I'd just left school, math homework still in my bag. My mind raced through every step I'd taken, no wrong turn, no stop inside that store. Yet their stares told me they weren't here for answers. They were here for confirmation. "Hands where we can see 'em," the taller officer demanded, his tone leaving no room for hesitation. I complied, heart hammering so loud I could hear it in my ears. Reynolds nodded with the satisfaction of someone who'd already decided my guilt before I even knew the crime. They asked Reynolds for details, but his answers slid through their questions like water. He had on dark clothes," he said, glancing at my hoodie. "How tall?" "About his height," Reynolds replied, gesturing at me like I was Exhibit A. No mention of a face, no clear markers, just a shape, a color, a silhouette. Still, the officers exchanged a look that said the case was closed. I tried again. "You know I wasn't in your store." "I was walking from school," the shorter cop cut me off. "Funny, you're fitting this pretty good." It was as if the description had been crafted in real time, molded around me until escape was impossible. And the more I spoke, the more they leaned into the idea that I belonged in their narrative. The facts didn't matter, not when I was the easiest match they'd ever find. As they patted me down, the taller ones smirked. "Son, you look like you've done this before." The words hit harder than the grip on my wrists. My mouth went dry. "I've never stolen a thing in my life." "Sure," he said, drawing the word out like a joke he'd told 100 times. To him, it wasn't an accusation, it was a confirmation of what he already believed. His eyes didn't search for truth. They scanned for reasons to justify the cuffs already in his hand. Every pause, every flicker of his grin carried a weight that told me this was more than about a missing wallet or candy bar. This was about me, my skin, my presence in the wrong place at the wrong time. "You'll get your chance to explain," the shorter one muttered, but his tone said otherwise, the kind of promise that evaporates the second you walk into a cell. "I'm telling you, I didn't do this," I said as they pulled my arms behind my back. "Save it for the judge," came the reply, flat and bored. They moved with the rhythm of routine cuffs, pat down, shoved toward the car like my protests were background noise. My voice cracked, but it didn't slow them. I thought if I explained enough, if I gave them every detail of my day, they'd see the truth. But they never asked for details. They didn't want a timeline, didn't want to know where I'd been. All they needed was someone to fill the space between accusation and arrest. And I had walked into that space without even knowing it existed. When I met my public defender, he didn't look up from his desk for the first 30 seconds. Papers shuffled, phone buzzed, pen scratched across a yellow pad. "All right," he finally said, "this is minor. Just plead guilty, pay the fine, and we'll move on." Guilty. My voice rose, almost cracking. I didn't do anything. He sighed, leaning back. "Look, the system's clogged. Fighting this will drag on for months. Pleading saves you time." Time. I wanted my name clear, not a quick escape. But the way he spoke made it clear my innocence wasn't part of his strategy. Sitting across from him, I felt it settle in my chest, the truth I'd been avoiding. No one here cared about what happened on that sidewalk. This room wasn't a place for justice. It was a machine, and I was just another piece it was ready to grind down. "Why, Your Honor?" The sound cracked in Marcus's throat before he could push the words out. He gripped the edge of the table, determined to finish his sentence, but the judge leaned forward, lips curling. "Spit it out, son. We don't have all day," he said, dragging out each word like it was some kind of joke. A ripple of unease moved through the courtroom. Marcus tried again. I didn't. Oh, this is going to take a while, isn't it? The judge cut in, his voice carrying a mockery so sharp it sliced the air. Maybe you should write it down instead of wasting everyone's time. Heat rushed to Marcus's face. His stutters, something he'd fought to control for years, had just been turned into a public spectacle. He could feel every set of eyes burning into him, not in sympathy, but in judgment. Continue, the judge said, waving his hand like he was dismissing a child. If you can. Marcus swallowed hard. His voice shook, not from guilt, but from rage. I am innocent. The judge smirked. That's what they all say. Somewhere in the back, a chair squeaked against the floor, but all Marcus could hear was the thundering in his own chest, the sound of dignity being stripped away in front of strangers who now saw him as exactly what the system wanted, a joke, and still he had more to say, but the moment was already slipping from his hands. It started, small, a chuckle from the corner of the gallery, then another, followed by a wave of half-hidden grins. Even those who didn't laugh wore the same look. Pitiful. Marcus clenched his jaw. He'd been humiliated before, but never with this kind of audience, never with the power of the law behind it. The sound filled the room, pressing against him until it felt hard to breathe. From the corner of his eye, he caught a woman shaking her head, whispering to the man beside her. The man shrugged, as if to say, well, what do you expect? The laughter wasn't just noise. It was a verdict before the verdict. Marcus tried to focus on the thought that had brought him here, on the truth he wanted to tell. But every snicker chipped away at the strength he'd built to stand here in the first place. He glanced at the jury. A few looked away when his eyes met theirs. Others stared back with cold detachment, their expressions already set in stone. The room quieted again, but the damage lingered, clinging to him like smoke. And at the front, the prosecutor was watching, calculating. The prosecutor leaned back in his chair, arms folded, a smile pulling at the corners of his mouth. It wasn't joy, it was the satisfaction of watching the scales tip without lifting a finger. Marcus knew that look. It was the look of someone who'd already decided the ending. The smirk said, "This is over. You just don't know it yet." Their eyes met for a moment. The prosecutor didn't blink. Instead, he slowly reached for his pen, tapping it against a legal pad as if he were marking down the final score of a game. Marcus's stomach twisted. He wasn't just fighting accusations, now he was fighting a story they'd already written. One where his innocence was nothing but a footnote. Still, a part of him waited, hoped for someone on his side to stand up, to push back against the tide. Marcus turned toward his public defender, searching for a spark of outrage, a sign that someone in this room believed in him. The man kept his eyes on his notes, flipping through pages that didn't need flipping. "You're not going to say anything?" Marcus whispered, his voice raw. The lawyer didn't look up. "Best not to make it worse," he murmured. "Make it worse?" Marcus's words came out sharper than intended. "He just mocked me in front of everyone." That's the way it is," the lawyer cut in quietly, adjusting his tie. "We stick to the facts, avoid pushing buttons. Trust me, this is the smartest approach." Marcus sat back, the weight of those words sinking in. Smart, it felt like surrender. Like silence wasn't strategy, was complicity. The lawyer scribbled something on a legal pad and leaned forward. "We'll talk after," he said, eyes still fixed downward. Marcus realized then that he was standing alone in a fight he'd been told was fair. And if this was fair, What did unfair look like? From the gallery, a teenage girl leaned toward her mother, whispering, "This ain't right." Her voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the stillness. The mother gave her a look that said stay. Quiet, but her daughter's eyes stayed locked on Marcus. Full of defiance, a reporter lifted his camera, snapping a photo just as Marcus looked up. The click echoed in his ears. Somewhere deep inside, he felt a shift, small but real. Not everyone here saw him the way the judge and prosecutor did. Some saw the injustice for what it was, but before he could hold on to that thought, the gavel struck. "Leave my boy alone." The voice tore through the courtroom before Marcus even turned his head. His mother was standing, eyes wet, hands gripping the wooden rail. "Ma, sit down," Marcus pleaded, but she didn't move. "My son didn't do this. You hear me? He didn't." Her voice cracked, but her words were unshakable. The judge banged his gavel. "Ma'am, one more outburst and you'll be removed." She opened her mouth again, but Marcus shook his head. Slowly, painfully, she sat, her shoulders trembling. The gavel fell once more. "Proceed." Marcus lowered his gaze to the table, the edges of his vision blurring. His mother's words echoed in his mind, but so did the silence from his own defense. Every breath felt heavier. Every sound in the room seemed distant. For the first time, he allowed the thought to form the one he'd been holding back since the arrest. Maybe they'd already decided his fate the moment he walked in. He didn't want to believe it, but as the prosecutor shuffled papers with that same quiet smirk, belief didn't matter. The weight had settled, and it wasn't letting go. "Your Honor, may I?" The voice came from the back, calm, deep, and commanding. The heavy wooden door groaned open, every creak slicing through the silence. Marcus turned, eyes widening. There, framed in the doorway, stood Denzel Washington, his tailored suit catching the dim light, every step deliberate. Beside him walked a sharp-eyed civil rights attorney, briefcase in one hand, determination in the other. They didn't rush. They didn't need to. The room seemed to shift around them. The judge's brows knit together. "And you are?" "I'm here for him," Denzel replied, nodding toward Marcus. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried like thunder. The attorney stepped forward, handing over documents without breaking eye contact with the bench. Marcus's chest tightened it from fear this time, but something he hadn't felt in weeks. Hope. It was as if the walls pressing in on him had finally cracked. A ripple of murmurs spread like a tide. "That's Denzel Washington," someone whispered. But the next voice cut deeper. He grew up on the same block as Marcus. It wasn't just a celebrity now, it was a connection. The gallery straightened in their seats, sensing the balance shift. The prosecutor's pen froze mid-scribble. Even the bailiff's stance changed, uncertain. Marcus's mind flooded with memories, Denzel waving from across the street, giving advice over a chain-link fence, dropping by his mother's porch to check on the neighborhood kids. This wasn't an outsider swooping in for the cameras. This was someone who had seen the boy before the accusations, before the chains. And now he was here. The civil rights attorney pulled out a phone and pressed play. The sound filled the courtroom, laughed, sharp and cruel. The judge's voice echoed. "What's wrong, son? Cat, got your tongue?" A low rumble passed through the crowd. It wasn't just the words, it was the smirk, the way the gavel had been slammed to drown Marcus out. The attorney looked up. 3 million views in less than 24 hours, he said, letting the number sink in. Every major outlet is covering it. America is watching. Marcus didn't need to check the screen. He could feel the outrage in the room, see it burning in strangers' eyes. This was no longer just a trial, it had become a public reckoning. The attorney stepped toward the bench. "Judicial misconduct, Your Honor. The record shows you ridiculed the defendant, interrupting his testimony without cause. This behavior undermines the very foundation of a fair trial." The judge leaned back, eyes narrowing. "Watch your tone, counselor." "I'm watching the Constitution, sir," the attorney replied, his voice unwavering. "And it doesn't bend for personal bias." The words hung heavy, the kind that didn't fade but carved themselves into the air. Marcus felt a pulse of energy, like the tide was finally turning in his favor. The gallery shifted forward in their seats, waiting to see how the judge would respond. The gavel came down once, twice, each strike weaker than the last. "Order." The judge barked, but the command no longer carried the same authority. Whispers persisted. Pens scratched against notepads. The camera lens in the back adjusted for a clearer shot. Marcus watched the man in the robe try to steady himself, his voice sounding smaller with every word. The authority he'd wielded so easily moments ago was slipping, and everyone could see it. "I've known Marcus since he was 5, Denzel began, looking directly at the jury. "I've seen him help his elderly neighbor carry groceries every Saturday. I've watched him tutor kids who couldn't read. I've seen him choose the harder right over the easier wrong." The prosecutor tried to interject, but the judge said, "Now let Denzel continue. This young man is not a criminal. He is the product of a community that believed in him, and I will not stand here while lies destroy his life." Marcus's throat tightened. For the first time in weeks, the truth wasn't a whisper, was the loudest voice in the room. "Case dismissed." The words cracked through the tension like lightning. The gavel struck once, sharp and final. Marcus didn't breathe at first. His eyes darted to the civil rights attorney, who gave a single nod. The prosecutor's desk sat littered with crumpled papers, their so-called evidence exposed as fabrication. The judge, no longer presiding, was already under investigation, stripped of the authority he'd abused. The gallery erupted in whispers, some relieved, others stunned. Marcus felt the invisible weight that had chained him to fear begin to slip away. For weeks, his life had been a cage. Now, the door stood open, yet freedom felt strange, like a new language he was only beginning to understand. His mother's hand found him, trembling but firm. "Let's go," she whispered, her voice breaking halfway through. They stepped into the hallway, each stride heavier with relief than the last. The smell of the courtroom still clung to him, but the air out here was cleaner, freer. Marcus glanced down at her hand, worn and strong from years of holding a family together. Now, it held him in a way that told him he wasn't just leaving a trial, he was reclaiming his life. The doors swung wide, and a roar met them. Chants rose from a sea of faces, neighbors, activists, classmates, strangers, holding signs with his name in bold letters. Cameras flashed, but for once they didn't feel invasive. He spotted Mr. Alvarez from the corner store, Mrs. Johnson from his old school, even kids from the basketball court. People who had once whispered now shouted without hesitation. Marcus had spent weeks feeling like an outcast. Now, standing in the middle of this storm of support, he realized he had never been alone, only waiting for the right moment to see it. By nightfall, the footage of his acquittal flooded every platform. Comment sections swelled with demands for juvenile justice reform. Protests erupted downtown. Students organized walkouts, and petitions soared past 1 million signatures. Marcus's case had started as one boy's fight for dignity, but now it was a banner carried by thousands. Every voice chanting in the streets felt like an echo of the one he'd nearly lost in that courtroom. This wasn't just about clearing his name anymore. It was about dismantling the systems that had tried to bury it. The crowd quieted as Marcus stepped to the microphone. "I used to think my voice didn't matter," he began, his tone steady. "I was wrong." He spoke of injustice not as theory, but as a weight he'd carried and survived. His stutter, once a cage, barely surfaced. Every sentence landed with the certainty of someone who had walked through fire and found himself still standing. "This isn't the end," he told them, scanning the faces that had lifted him from isolation. "This is the beginning." And the cheer that followed shook the ground beneath his feet. You heard the verdict. You saw the faces. If it were you in that courtroom, every eye fixed, every word deciding your future, how would you have stood your ground? Would you have spoken or stayed silent? Your voice matters here. Drop your own story in the comments times you've faced injustice, moments you challenged racism, or when you stood for someone else. Your experience could be the spark someone else needs today. Don't let this end with a scroll. Like, share, and subscribe to keep this message alive. Every click pushes it further, reaching more people who need to hear it now.